I was muted. So once again, hello, welcome everybody. Hello, Lily. This is our seventh meetup in this series. We'll be talking about TypeScript today. In the past few months, this series ran as kind of like preface to the FOSDEM conference. And even though the FOSDEM 2021 is over, the organizers of this meetup love open source, so they decided to continue running those events. You can find the recordings from the previous sessions on the website, Contributing.today /past-sessions. You can find some recordings on Python, Golang, Rust, and many more non-runtime related topics. And you can also go check out the website and see what there is for the next week. A bit of a spoiler, we're planning to have machine learning. My name is Alexandra. I will be one of your hosts today. I'm working as a tech lead at Hasura, and you may know me from Twitter. I'm co-organizing Wrocław TypeScript meetups. And my co-host is Lily. Over to you, Lily. Okay. I think that Lily has a few problems. Lily, you are muted. Okay, so in the meantime, I will continue when I think Lily will rejoin, and then she will introduce herself. So I just wanted to mention a few points before we start. We have a code of conduct. You can find it on the website Contributing.today /code-of-conduct, and we will be like monitoring the chat, so please be kind to each other. Also, the chat is on Discord, so you can join the Discord server and feel free to ask questions, leave comments, and so on. And this whole meetup is being made possible by Microsoft. And also we are using Contributing Today hashtag on Twitter, so feel free to use it as well. Lily, are you back with us?
Hi.
Hello.
Am I back?
Yes.
Excellent. Perfect. So hi, my name's Lily. I'm a technical services architect at Sneak. I'm very excited to be here today. Generally, I work very closely with customers building custom TypeScript solutions. Previously, I was a lead engineer at Sneak in one of the languages teams, learning a lot about different package managers, how the different dependency resolution algorithms work. So I know a lot of useless trivia about that, if anyone is interested. And generally, when I'm not coding, I like to hang upside down and do circus things. That's me.
Awesome. So let's take a look at the agenda, what we have for today. So at first, we'll have TypeScript panel discussion with Orta and Daniel. Then we'll have presentation by Aishagul on Babylon.js with TypeScript. And then our host Lily will tell us about TypeScript projects at Snick. But we'll also have a little surprise for you. So Lily, do you want to share some details?
Absolutely. So there is a raffle today, and we are handing out several copies of Stefan Baumgartner's book, TypeScript in 50 Lessons, which he published in collaboration with Smashing Magazine. So very exciting. Our speakers will be aiding us in awarding books for the best questions. So please submit your questions in the chat.
Awesome. So without further ado, let me introduce our first two speakers. Orta and Daniel will talk about TypeScript language decisions. And Orta is a software engineer at Microsoft. You can know him from all the amazing work he's doing on TypeScript website, docs, and handbook, and everything else. And Daniel is a program manager for TypeScript at Microsoft, and he's a frequent author on the devblogs.microsoft.com/TypeScript, and he's writing all those amazing posts on the upcoming releases. So over to you.
It's very kind of you. Thank you. Thank you for having us on today, on Contributing.today. I'm not exactly sure where to get started. If there's anything that you all want to hear first, if you have any.
I think an interesting one might be what's happening with TypeScript right now. What's coming up?
Well, next week we are coming out with our 4.2 release. It is pretty jam-packed with features. There are a couple of really cool highlights that I'm excited for that I can speak to. I'm sure Orda can as well. If you're able to now, we already have the release candidate, which is a good opportunity for people to try it out. Let us know if there are issues. So we always appreciate those. We have a beta, a nightly, and an RC. But I'm sure a lot of you are just looking forward to what's coming up. I think, or maybe this is on your mind too, but I think the better type display thing is probably the thing that most users are excited for.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I can dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, you definitely should.
So for the better type display, if you've used TypeScript before, you often have, if you've used this language, you've seen how flexible it can be, right? And I often say that with that flexibility, with a lot of that work, we've ended up with what I call UX debt, right? You end up seeing these very powerful types displayed in the editor. They're displayed in your declaration files, and you end up with pretty gnarly, nasty, big types. So, for example, you might have a union type that has 1,000 members in it, because you use this operator called key_of, which shows you all the property names. And if you have 1,000 properties, you're gonna have 1,000 string literals in the union type.
And that's super common with people doing stuff with CSS or React.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you've used React in a non-trivial way, I'm sure you've seen this, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do is when you write a type alias, if you've written the word type foo equals whatever, we do a little bit of extra work. We actually attach that metadata to the union type if we can, and we say, hey, this was declared as a union type. As a type alias. Whenever you use that union, we're going to try to recover that information. So if you union it with something else, you won't necessarily just see a big old union with another type, but we'll actually try to say take that original type alias and union it with something else, which is not necessarily how it's represented internally. We actually represent it with what's called a non-normalized form, which is just a fancy way of saying yeah, it's a fancy way of saying we don't try to keep the type in a easy to reason about representation. So it doesn't just,
it's a bit like the literal version of it, right? It's as if you had wrote it out manually yourself, const a equals blah blah blah.
Exactly. The crux of it is we're trying to just keep the representation of what you would have written, right? Every single time you create a new union or you create a new key_of or whatever, we're just going to say okay, did I have that old information? Try to construct what a user wrote there. And if it doesn't end up being, I think maybe if it ends up being bigger than what you would have written out if you read the actual union type, we'll show you that. And this is this sounds oh, well, they're just working on type display. Yeah, this is a big deal actually, because for years, this is just a big pain point for beginners, right? And for years we've heard from companies that oh, as soon as I see this, I'm overwhelmed, right? You see this in error messages. You see this when you hover over something in the editor.
It could be a lot of information.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of the thing is like with JavaScript with TypeScript, you're trying to appeal to a lot of JavaScript users, people who have never used a static type system at all. If you see those error messages, like you're going to get overwhelmed. So like you have a lot of beginners who like a lot of the time they come from coding boot camps. They've used JavaScript for 12 weeks, and now you're saying like, yeah, try this out. So type display is a big deal. And
it affects all JavaScript users too, right? So that's anybody using definitely type behind the scenes, which is more or less every JavaScript user.
Right. Yeah. I actually, maybe a lot of people don't know about that. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. If you don't know, TypeScript powers most JavaScript tooling. So if you've ever used VS Code or Sublime Text's TypeScript extension, TypeScript runs it's all of its tooling over JavaScript, and basically whenever you get dot completions in an editor, that chances are, with the exception of like WebStorm, that's coming from TypeScript. And in order to provide like rich libraries of information for things that are not shipped with TypeScript, like the DOM API, like the web browser API, then there is a project called Definitely Typed, which keeps track of almost, I think you're in the 25,000-ish NPM modules and sort of web things. It's a massive project. And that keeps track of like what the files, what the header files, if you know that from the sort of other programming languages, or interface files, ways to describe existing JavaScript structures. And basically JavaScript people are using this without even knowing it at this point because of something called automatic type acquisition, which just grabs it behind the scenes in your editor. Very powerful.
Yeah, we've often heard like people in discussions saying like, why do you even need TypeScript? Like, I just get autocomplete in my editor.
JavaScript is so good.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the funny part, right? Like, we don't consider that a loss, right? If someone says, oh, well, this is just really good, why would I use TypeScript? Well, they're benefiting from the tooling that we built, right? We just want people to be more productive, right? So, that comes down to like one of the slogans that we have on the site, which is like type JavaScript at any scale. Like we're trying to accommodate you at whatever your workload is and what your target is and what you're building, regardless of if it's like a big TypeScript app or if it's like a very short JavaScript script, right?
It's why I like to think of it as like it's a spectrum. Basically, it is because TypeScript powers your tooling on the JavaScript side. You're conceptually using TypeScript, even if it is just a quick script, all the way up to I want the most like intense TypeScript experience with strict mode and all these extra flags whose job is to make your life a little bit harder, but know that you are definitely a little bit more correct because of it.
Yeah, sure. I think that we've got a question, which is, do we have the same concerns with using linters? Though I'm not exactly sure what the concerns are specifically. Like, is the concern, I mean, maybe the concern is like, is it a supplement versus, like, does it take over TypeScript instead of it? Like, what is the value of TypeScript versus a linter, I guess, is a question we might be getting.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten that question for so long, but it's faded out over time. I'm trying to think of like what we used to answer for that.
I think TypeScript sort of stood on the foot of linters a little bit with some of its rules, but overall, in part, that's to power the editor experience in case you don't have a lot of those linters already installed. But
yeah, it's weird. Right. Well, I mean, like, because there's two things there, right? Like, there's how much of TypeScript's analysis is just like the same stuff as linters, right? And then how much of it is what do we do beyond linters, right? I think yes, like you mentioned, right? Like there are certain cases where it would have been inefficient to hand off some of the analysis that we do to a linter. It used to be that linters couldn't take advantage of type information. Now ESLint has like a TypeScript like a TypeScript support for ESLint, like a plugin. So you can actually just say like, hey, TypeScript, give me the information that you've got, and like let me do some stuff with it. But I mean, it needs to get the type information from somewhere, and really what that comes down to is like linters often work more on syntactic information that is local to a single file at best, right? So if you are considering if you're thinking about like, oh, I want to be able to like construct some deep information about this code, linters typically limit themselves to like a single file at a time. But even then, you need to actually construct like information about like where types are flowing in and how you declared things, and then you need some deeper analysis. And a linter in theory could build that, but like then you're just building a type checker, right? So there's like there's not a great distinction exactly.
I think linters also the scope has changed over time. Like today, if I was using a linter, I wouldn't use it for formatting, for example. Like to me, that is now the responsibility of a formatter. And we have like good tools that take a sort of slice of what used to be a larger linter sort of concept. And now type checking is handled by a type checker. Linting is more about like the cultural rules of your team. And formatting is just, one or two settings and then you forget about it.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's always a hard question to like figure out scope, right? A lot of like the original design of TypeScript came from the design of the Roslyn compiler, which was this effort to say, hey, from the C# team, everything that we've been building the last 10, 15, 20 years or so, I guess it was like 10 at the time. What are the things that could we actually build a C# compiler that is also the engine for your editor, that is also the thing that like gives you the all-in-one experience? And so when TypeScript was built out, like there was some sort of the same vision, like bootstrapping the compiler in TypeScript. So it's all built in TypeScript. Anyone who knows TypeScript can contribute. And it also powers the editor too. And some of that came to be, right? Like, all of it actually did come to be, but it was more like, what are some of the cultural things that happen in the JavaScript ecosystem that like changed that, right? So like we have a formatter. I consider it pretty good. But
I've shipped some code to it.
Yeah.
So I use it occasionally.
Yeah, I agree. But I think another part of it is, there are different opinions that have come up in the ecosystem. And, part of us, I think, in the community, we favor like loose coupling between tools these days. There's a little bit of a pendulum swing between that, right? Like I think we're going back to prescriptive for like all-in-one, but they're still built on like smaller components a lot of the time. I don't know. I mean, would you say, does that mesh with your view of the world too?
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, since I've joined the TypeScript team, I've stopped using a linter, realistically. I only use it on the TypeScript code base.
I kind of do too. Like it's very bad to say because I feel like I'm not supposed to say that because like we have contacts on the VS Code team who contribute to the ESLint plugin and the editor. But I don't use it because I find a lot of the lints that are like either by default turned on to be a little bit too aggressive and jump at you, right? Like it'll tell you like a variable is undeclared in a very aggressive way, but like you don't necessarily care when you first read the variable. So it's strange. I do lean on TypeScript more. Even like things about automatic semicolon insertion, they're often like not a problem if you have a type system to tell you like you're about to index into something instead of like writing an array with a bunch of commas
in the wrong place.
These things are like sort of true in C, in like other languages like C and C# and whatever too, but like we don't care because you'll get an error before you run your code. Hey Alexandra, you're muted.
Again, it always happens. So I have this question because you've been talking a bit about like making developers productive and about the fact that most people are coming from JavaScript world. So I have this question, like, so there is this like pretty broad spectrum of like what you can get from TypeScript. Like on the one side of the spectrum, we have like, I will write my JavaScript code, I won't care about TypeScript, and then at the end, I will, fill the gaps with a few TypeScript types. In many cases with any, because it may turn out to be, hard to type. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have, type-driven development. So I just wanted to ask, like, how would you, kind of like push people more towards this type-driven development spectrum? I mean, not exactly to like the very end of this, but, kind of like somewhere to the middle, or maybe more to this type-driven.
Do you
I
want
think
to
it's
go?
nuanced. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think it's about projects, not people. So it's like, an individual, I know how to use most features of TypeScript nowadays, but I still write in JavaScript pretty regularly and just put a little //ts enable at the top, because I don't think this project needs all of the extra infrastructure that TypeScript does to make it work. And so like you as an individual just need to be able to know how far you want to take that sliding scale. That to me is the interesting part. That's like, do people know that they can like just turn on JS doc support and actually get some rich typing information enough that they don't need to jump into having to maybe have Babel in there, have TypeScript in there? Or is this project so like mission critical that it just needs the strictest settings possible? I used to work on a React Native app, and if you ship a wrong version of a React Native app, then it takes a long time to get a rollback done. And in those cases, we needed every flag that was possible, every single linter that was possible, just to make sure that we were 100% sure of the JavaScript we were sending. And so you as an individual, you should be jumping between both, like very rich and very strict, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you alluded to something, which is like, what's your turnaround time, right? What does your dev loop look like? If you think about what enabled TypeScript, it was ES6, right? Like there was this time where we had all these browsers that were all ECMAScript 5, right? They didn't run the newest version of JavaScript, and then bam, there were like 4 years, 5 years, I don't exactly know, but like a long period of time where like the JavaScript committee was like working on these big features that were going to come out in the next version, and I think it like was waiting for like 6 years or something like that. Then they all came out at once, and you had like this divide of like, here's the evergreen browsers, and then here's like IE11 or whatever, and they're not going to run all the same features. You need a compiler or something like that. You need polyfills if you want to use these features, right? And so TypeScript kind of leveraged it. It had an opportunity where people were saying like, well, I'm willing to take these features. Oh, I'm also willing to take other things like, hey, what's this JSX thing, or what's this TypeScript thing? And like, it was a very cool period. But like, that's the pendulum I was talking about before, right? Like now people are saying like, I don't want to do this for every project, right? Like now I run the latest node, it has all these features. How am I going to just get a reasonable workflow? That's where TS check comes in, right? Or like just the plain JavaScript support that you get in your editor. We want to be there for you, like, however. But like, thinking about things like how much should I be using any versus like, I think about the types of my signatures first, and then I write code. Like that's that type-driven development thing that you mentioned. Again, I think it sort of depends, right? Like I personally try to do that as well. But if you are experimenting, when you're trying to learn about like, you have a goal in mind. Maybe you're building a project and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I know I'll probably use these libraries. You don't know what the libraries look like yet. So it's kind of like thinking about things in terms of type-driven development really forces you to like stop and think and like deeply analyze like what libraries you're using, right? What are the data structures you're going to be funneling around? If you don't have that time, or you're not that type of person, like maybe you just like to try to like bang things out and see like, okay, what functions does it just have, right? Like hit dot and let me see what it has. it's a very different mode of development, right? I think like once a project has matured a little bit, like type-driven development becomes a lot easier because someone has laid the groundwork to do that. If you're the type of person who likes to start a project with type-driven development, then it works great. But you might just be hacking. And that's like kind of the cool part of the industry is like there's room for both. It just depends on who you are as a person. It's my personal take.
Cool, thanks. And also, if you are like you're going into this type-driven development and you write all those types for your functions modules or whatever, then this kind of sometimes this implementation kind of like falls into place naturally. Like with types you can figure out what you need even if you're like stuck and you don't know how exactly you're going to implement this. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I love it. But I'm
100%.
biased.
I'm 100% the person that would start every project with TypeScript nowadays. So I would be interested to hear, are there any tips or things that you would recommend to make it easier to get started with TypeScript from the get-go?
A lot of people just use blogs to learn TypeScript. We have really great documentation.
Yeah.
We have
That's
a
true.
handbook and a version 2 of the handbook that has been a work in progress for a few years that should be coming out this year sometime that you can go through. Yeah, there we go. That is an incredibly rich resource, very up to date, and covers not literally everything because doing so would make it very hard to read, but the stuff you need to be a very productive TypeScript user.
Yeah, I do agree with that. One thing that I have been thinking about is the project setup experience, where we may want to do a little bit more prescriptive advice and documentation in that regard. So, like, if you're getting started with TypeScript and you've already like set up your project, you've got like a TS-config, you've got a build system, whatever. That I think we're well equipped to support you on the website and our documentation. I think you'll see improvements in the project setup domain as well going forward. I think the other things that I would recommend are look into certain low friction tools that will help you iterate quickly. And this ties into like how TypeScript just works with other tools in the ecosystem. Something that I experimented with recently was this tool called Vite, or you might pronounce it Vita, but it's Vite. And it uses a tool called ESBuild under the cover, and your development time is like lightning fast. It's very quick. It's very easy to spin up a development server so that if you're doing front-end development, I was very impressed. Let me just put it that way. That's probably something I would like to call out. So things that can help your development workflow so that you're thinking about like the actual code rather than like the build tools. I definitely understand where people are coming from when they push for that more.
Yeah, I think TypeScript as a team has done a really good job in the last 2 years of trying to persuade other people to implement TypeScript in their own tools. In part by just like lots of people, feeling like TypeScript is big enough to support it, but also TypeScript, the team has done the work in places like Babel. But we're seeing now like the sort of next generations of Babel and like ESBuild, like SWC and Sucrase. All of these are like transpilers in the same sense, but they're actually like much faster because they know what they want. Like we all used to try and guess what the JavaScript future looks like, and the future is today basically. And so all of these these modern tools are just adding TypeScript support natively to their actual build processes. So using those will get you a lot of speed in exchange for simplicity as well.
Yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off, and people often I think that is something worth calling out, which is these are build tools, and they don't necessarily type check the JavaScript or your TypeScript code, which can often be confusing. But like originally, TypeScript as a compiler was both, right? It still is, but the fact that you can decouple the type checker from the actual build pipeline is something that you can sort of pick and choose. This is sort of the like a la carte thing that we talked about before, where like I pick my own like formatter, I pick a linter that is like not built in, and then I also have like a build tool along with my type checker, right? Fun fact, Orda, that's how I actually met Orda, was like investigating, whether or not it made sense to try to like help support the Babel team, integrate TypeScript and whatnot. We were trying to understand like people's workflows and things like that, and the difficulties of why they weren't using TypeScript a lot of the time. So that's some. I don't know. It's a nice memory.
I think so.
Amazing. We do have a question.
Sure.
The question is, what is the process you use for managing TypeScript project? Can anyone contribute?
Yeah, I would say so. I think we have some like incredibly prolific contributors that I'm like surprised about sometimes. They work very hard, but like they started out with, I think, a couple of small pull requests that were approachable. We try to mark pull requests as good first issues, and we also typically give them like difficulty tags. So help wanted is just like, we're looking for PRs. Good first issue is like hey, please, this is like an easy one. If you're willing to put in the work, you can totally.
We try to avoid those too.
Yeah, we try to keep those up for grabs for like other people. I won't triage it that way if I feel like, oh, this seems like a fun
this needs
one,
to be
because
in,
like
yeah.
I'm about to fix it, right? Exactly. But then like, if you're willing to just ping people on the team and like talk through it, and you've also like followed the contributing guidelines, then we're happy to try to help you. I think like the investment pays off long term, and it doesn't have to be something where like you're committed to it. You might just say like, seems like a cool bug. I've never worked on a compiler. I've never worked on like a language service before, which is kind of novel in itself. So I think that's definitely easy. And compared to other projects I recently tried, like if you have NPM and Node, like you're already able to run the test suite. Like you don't need a Docker configuration. We do support that. We have like some stuff built in, like for dev containers, but you don't need that. You just need Node and NPM, and you can like run the compiler, which is pretty nice.
That's really
It's all
great.
just JavaScript.
Yeah.
That's cool. What kind of turnaround can somebody expect? So if somebody pings you and says, hey, I'm really interested in this issue, what kind of interactions can they expect from you? Something that, I don't know, do you have an SLA where you respond within X number of days, a week?
Yeah, we don't have an SLA. I would say like, I would want to say if you get the attention of the person who triaged, or someone who's a domain expert in the PR, you can get like answers pretty quickly. It's not perfect, right? Like it's like missing an email, right? That can happen. Like, I mean, GitHub issues are plentiful, like, right? So we it's tough. I would just say be persistent if you're really interested. Like I apologize if you ever do get, if you're like a post just falls off the radar, but I think we want to do better, and we want to do well by contributors.
We have a backup plan too, which is the TypeScript community Discord. There's like a section in there for people that are sort of understanding TypeScript compiler API and the internals of it, and people are chatting in there most days. So it might not be a TypeScript team member giving you the advice that you're looking for if you're like stuck in the middle of a bug, but it might be somebody that has already contributed before and has a general sense.
That's a good point. I'm continuously impressed by some of the people who are using our APIs for different things. And the Discord's a great place. Like, not just if you're a contributor, like also if you're just learning TypeScript too. If you have like questions, there's like a questions area as well. There's like a how to ask questions.
Yeah, there's like 10 plus simultaneous questions going on most of the time. And they all have their own little channels. It's really cool.
Yeah.
We have another question. Was there a tipping point for TypeScript to become famous?
I think everyone likes to say that the tipping point was when Angular announced that they were going to be using it. Like there's like some chart of searches per day on Google for TypeScript, and like you look around like May of I don't know, 2015 or something like that, and then it just like shoots up. And so that's when like people were like, oh, this is a serious technology. It's weird because like I am super biased and I pay attention I paid attention to dev tools a lot. So like I remember when it first came out, I was in college, I was talking to my friends. I'm like, oh, have you heard about this TypeScript thing? And they're like, huh, what? Like I didn't know or care. But I think like that was one of the things. And
I think Babel was the next big sort of explosion because people.
Yeah, I think that was a big. I don't know if it was more famous, but it was a huge milestone, right? Because like if you knew about it, you could now use it if you already had like an existing build system. That was a big thing. I think
if you've ever seen the sort of stages of growth sort of charts, I think like Angular was the first sort of early stage adopters, and then like the Babel system was like adopters. Like it was the first point where like the vast majority of these JavaScript projects could start using TypeScript without going entirely in on TypeScript for every single thing that they needed in their ecosystem.
Yeah, I right, because I think like there's a difference between like awareness and like everyone's using it. And I do remember like going to different conferences and like getting different feedback over time. Like I remember I went to like a Node conference and like I literally overheard like a couple of speakers being like, I don't know what this TypeScript thing is. Like, is it the next CoffeeScript? Whatever. Like, I don't want to like think about all these technologies that are going to be dead in like 3 years. And like this was a common perception. And then all of a sudden, like it seemed like, I mean, if you look at survey results, which I know there's a lot of bias in, but like if you look at the results and you see like something like 60 to 70% of users are saying like they use TypeScript in their projects, it's not something that we believed was going to happen in this time frame, right? Like that shocks us still.
We have a few more questions, and I think the next one is one of my favorite things to talk about, really. So the question is there some way to partially move a project to 100% TypeScript in a monorepo approach? So I think they mean, is there a way to partially move a workspace or a project within a monorepo? For example, just moving the utility functions, but not the React components.
I think a good process for this is to think about that sort of spectrum we mentioned earlier. Like a good example of this is Chrome DevTools. That's the inspector when you right click on a thing and then look at the list of all the elements. That was originally a large JavaScript project, and they thought that they wanted to move towards something like TypeScript. So the first thing that they did was they sort of added JSDoc, which is JSDoc is an old documentation format that TypeScript effectively like became the main like usage for in modern code, in my opinion. I mean, I don't see many JSDoc generated web pages, so that's my main argument against that. And what ended up happening is they got a lot of the power of TypeScript editing support into the project first. And so rather than jumping straight from JavaScript to TypeScript, they had a stopping point where they said, we're going to make JSDoc support throughout the entire system. And then once that's good and stable and we're happy with it, then we will evaluate whether we should move from JSDoc to TypeScript.
Yeah, I think like the thing that we've typically talked about is you start from the leaves of, well, I don't know if leaves are the right term, but like the roots maybe. The things that like have no dependencies in a project, you want to start typing those more and more. Once you have those, other people can consume them, right? That it just sort of makes sense because the types can be inferred from those modules. The hardest things are the things, I mean, it's hard because like the complexity usually lies in the things that have those dependencies, and they have to like funnel types around between other different dependencies. So it's unfortunate that you don't get faster feedback of like, oh, this type is actually, the types are helping me. But yeah, I think like that slider approach, that incremental approach, plus like starting out from like the things that don't have a lot of dependencies is the right one. We do have a migration guide on the website. It's pretty good, but I wrote it, so like I'm biased. It
Not
has a
bad.
lot of the advice. The advice has not changed fundamentally in years, right? Like it starts out like add types, maybe JS doc, then start turning on the strictness flags. Then you're starting to like really get the benefits of the type checker.
Yeah, there's a good tactic that I was taught by Google engineers, which is you use a type alias on any. So you rename any basically to be something like migration any, and you can sort of like, yeah, you can just make all these chunks of code that you know should eventually change, that are just allowing you to get away with things as you're going through the migration process, and then you can, you know, do a search on your entire project for those migration any's once you're in a more stable state too.
Yeah, it also happens for like really big projects that adopt TypeScript, where like they have so much code that like a minor version change on TypeScript could like impact them. So when they upgrade, they'll just have like a cast or a type assertion to say like as TypeScript 4.3 migration, right? And or I guess 4.3 is not the year yet, but you get the idea. Yeah, like by the time this video, well, like you'll see it and you'll be excited for 4.3 coming out. So yeah.
Great. I believe we have one last question, and that might have to be the last one. What does your day-to-day work look like working at Microsoft? Is it going through issues and PRs all day, or is there an internal advocacy role as well?
It's weird because like the advocacy thing is, I think like for a PM at Microsoft, that is an implicit expectation to some extent. But like, I think one of the things that when I was an engineer on the team, that was something that I enjoyed doing at least a little bit of, or at least like interfacing with our community in different ways. And so like, I think anyone's free to do that as long as like messaging is pretty like reasonable, right? I think like, and also we have different viewpoints on the team, which kind of like, we always kind of like start with a caveat like, hey, this is just my opinion, but then you know you're trying to keep track of like the ecosystem as well. For my end, you're trying to watch the issue tracker as well. And then there are also just like other questions from like different partner teams that you end up needing to like try to answer. Like I think the roles are different and they're defined by both like the person, your manager, and like, you know, the team, right? What the team needs at any given time changes. I don't know if Ordo wants to answer that differently or same or whatever, right?
Yeah, I guess my experience is quite drastically different because I'm both a very remote engineer. I think the time zone difference between us is somewhere around 8 hours from Dublin to Seattle. And so I do spend quite a lot of time just like doing GitHub issues, answering questions in the community. That's like during a time zone when no one else is doing that too. And then sort of catching up with everybody when during that sort of overlap few hours, like right now, effectively. And so I do get to, as a programmer, I do get spent quite a lot of time just like focusing on sort of hard technical problems that is, you know, the end result being that people get better experiences either in the web, docs, or TypeScript itself. Yeah.
I guess I used to be more of a night owl on the issue tracker as well. I guess I sometimes still am. And so like that was right, a little bit of what you got there.
Yeah.
But maybe to a more extreme now. Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel spends a lot of time just writing the blogs nowadays. There's one every few months. They're always the same. What are you copying and pasting between them?
It's funny because from that, like it used to be, we moved to like a 2-month release process a couple of years ago, and like eventually that was like almost killing me. because with that frequency you have to have a beta and like the full release. Now we actually have 3 per release, so it's like not any better, right? We're releasing every 3 months, but I guess maybe this is interesting in some way. Like I've started treating the blog posts kind of like the actual software that we're shipping, in that like you have a beta blog post and you just iterate on the blog post. So like, yes, the content might look very similar. In fact, like the text might not change in a lot of places. I used to feel bad about that. I don't anymore. I mean, a little
It's
bit.
actually like a great learning resource, all those posts.
The blog posts.
Yeah,
I keep hearing different things. I think like the TypeScript nerds like us, right? Like we love it. And then I recently was like hearing one podcast where it's like, what are people doing with TypeScript? Like I'm seeing the blog post, it seems like the craziest thing. So one teammate said that his old dev manager, if he ever wanted to like fall asleep, he would just start reading the TypeScript blog posts because they're so long.
They're long. And people don't understand why we need some of these features a lot of the time, right? Because they're not the sort of things that you would use in your day-to-day programming unless you are doing like very specific library code. Yes,
and so like a lot of people say like, why do I need this? And this is such a terrible feature. Like they're just adding bloat. So these days, I try to prefix a little bit of that and give context and say like, here's why you would use this. I even go back now and I try to say like, here's the base feature. Like if you have never seen this before, because chances are you might not, especially if you're like, should I learn this TypeScript thing? And you like look at the blog post and you're like,
ooh, variadic tuple types at different positions.
Yeah, like that's not the thing that we expect most users to use. So I think that's just been a thing that we've had to kind of like internalize too, and figure that out as well. But I am glad that people who go through the release notes do find value in them. So like I'm very happy to hear you say that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think they provide a really good sort of spectrum of documentation. We have to both provide reference material as well as sort of guide people through the cases of the individual bits. So I think the release notes have always done a pretty solid job of being like something that you can get excited to read about every quarter.
Okay,
Amazing.
Thank you a lot. I think we ran out of time. It was an amazing session. Time for our next speaker.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks.
So our next speaker is Aiko Janet, Senior Cloud Advocate. Hi, where are you joining us from today?
I am joining you from San Francisco. Sorry, my camera is not working at the moment, but well, I'll start sharing my screen very soon, so that shouldn't be a problem.
What time is it for you over there? It's a very international meetup.
That's true. It's 11:50 at the moment here
In the morning?
Yes.
Oh,
what time is
amazing.
it where you guys are?
I've just finished work, so it's about 7:50 for me. So this is my evening.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's 8:50 for me, so 1 hour later.
Thank you for doing this at a time that works very well for us too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is super fun.
Yeah. We're
And
super
Lily-
glad that you're joining.
Thank you for having me. Lily, I heard you say you're a circus person too.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I have my Lyra in the back. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, what is that?
Oh, a Lyra, it's a hoop. I don't know.
Oh, a hoop. Amazing. Yeah, I usually do flying trapeze, mostly because it terrifies me, but it's also really fun.
It is really terrifying, but it's
Yes.
fun. You're right.
Amazing. Looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Sure. Yes. Maybe I should start sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Can you guys see it? I think we have to. All right. I hope this is easy to see because let me try sharing one more time. All right. Okay. I have a really big screen. I hope this is good enough visibility for you. To start with, a little bit about me. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Azure, and I'm focusing on specifically AI and our cognitive services, and also spatial computing, which means things like AR and VR and everything else that's around it. So one thing that I wanted to show you today with TypeScript is the Babylon.js, which is a 3D library that allows you to create these kinds of experiences with AR and VR. And the reason I want to show you this is because it's a really, first of all, it's fun. And the second thing is that it's much easier to get started with, because it does have a playground that you could see over here. So if you go to babylonjs.com, you could learn more about the library. It has tons of tools, but before we get you overwhelmed with the amount of tools, let's look at the documentation. So they recently updated their documentation, and it's really nice. And you can just go to the Get Start With and then create scene and things like that. But the really cool thing about it is also it has all of the samples that you can run instantly. For example, let's look at the WebXR. So for those of you who are not very familiar with WebXR, because it's a very new web API, WebXR device APIs allow you to work with devices which has sensors and things that will allow you to have an immersive experience, like a VR headset or augmented reality on mobile or on a headset as well. So in Babylon.js documentation, if you go to WebXR introduction, for example, you can just click on the link that's right next to it and then take a look at the example. But we will start from the beginning. So this is, I'll make this a little bit bigger. All right, this is our very first scene, and this is our playground. So as you can see, there's a TypeScript and JavaScript tabs. So you can write with either one, and that will work, which is nice. And once you're done, you can save it, and you can use this link to view your application, or you can download it here as well. And then it will download the all of the HTML and the JavaScript or TypeScript files for you, and you can run it wherever you like. Let's get started. We talked about, how it helps to have the types so that you can start building something and then get some clues. And that's a thing that's happening on the playground as well. Let's take a look at what we have so far. As you can see, there's nothing being rendered. So we can run our scene and then see there's nothing. That's because we need a few things to create. First thing we need to create is a scene. You can think of the scene as this stage, and it's an object that holds everything that you have in your 3D scene that's in the canvas. And the second thing that we create is a camera. And the camera is our point of view. Because we are in a 3D world, we are not looking from one perspective. And we have the choice to move, right? So that's why we have a camera, which is going to be the point of view. In this case, we are using a free camera. And if you hover over it, you can see what are the the variables that it needs. First thing is the name, is a string, and then second thing is the position. Because we are not in a 2D world anymore, instead of x, y on a 2D world, we have 3D vectors for positioning, x, y, and z. And you don't have to worry too much about it because Babylon makes it really easy to work with vectors, and you don't actually have to know how that works. And finally, that's the scene. So scene is our JavaScript object, right, that holds together everything. And we are giving the scene because we want to add the camera to that particular scene. And once we have that camera, right now we have X, Y, and Z position defined. Then we have to, this is the location of the camera. And then we have to point the camera, right? Because you could be looking at any other direction from the camera being in the same spot. So this line 9 is doing that. We are setting the camera target to vector 0, which means the center of the world for Babylon or any 3D world. So it's going to be 0, 0, 0 position, X, Y, and Z. And then we are attaching the camera control to the canvas. This allows us to actually being able to move the camera on our scene, but we can't really see it because we don't have anything in the scene so far. Another important thing is to create a lighting for your scene. So this is a little bit different than normal front-end development because everything is a 3D, and you have to think of it as a kind of like a set design or a theater production instead of just HTML. So basically, we have the scene, which is the stage, and we have the camera view, which we would have, and then we have to have lighting, and then we have to have some actors or objects to see on the scene. So if you don't have lighting, it's going to be still dark, so we won't see anything at all. So we have the hemisphere lighting, which takes a name, direction, and a scene to be added to. So we have that, and we set the intensity of it. It's a value between 0 and 1, and you can make it as intense as you like. And finally, let's create a shape so we can see it. Okay, I'm going to just call it a shape. And as you can see, I'm getting type, like, how do I create this? I don't have to think about it. I can start writing, and then I can see like what I can do. This is a great way to discover the whole library too. Mesh Builder, let's see what it does. And then it has methods that's called create box and create all kinds of different interesting stuff. Let's create one. And then save it and then run it. What happens? Okay, so it was asking us to give it a name. String, not going to. And options for shape. All right, I'm going to create something a little bit more straightforward, like a box, I think. All right, and we need the name, and everything else seems to be optional. If you look at the options here, size, there's a question mark next to it. That means that this is an optional thing. You don't have to. Width, there's a question mark. That means that's optional. Height is optional. Depth is optional. And then face UVs, this is something to do with how we define the textures on top of it. And it seems like we don't have to do any of it. Right. Okay. So let's see. We run. side orientation undefined. Okay, so apparently I did miss the side orientation, but it seems like, all right. I failed on that one too. Oh, okay. So one of the things I should mention is that currently the playground is running the very latest. So there are some maybe breaking changes that I'm not aware of. And this playground is using that. But if you go to the right side, you can go to the latest version that has that I know that is the stable version. So I'm going to create a sphere. I think the second thing that, well, I'm looking at the options, the segments, diameter, all of these are optional, it seems. Arc number, okay. Hopefully that I'm not missing anything, and this would run. I think it's still trying to run the previous version. All right. Let's take a look. We have the mesh builder create sphere here, and what we are not doing. The segments were optional, actually. I don't know why it's asking, but let's copy and paste it here and see what happens. All right. Okay. That's interesting. Maybe the diameters were let me delete these and try it one more time. And well, this could be a bug here too. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So now we have a sphere, and then as you can see, we positioned it a little further down. What happens if we position it to 0? It just comes a little bit closer. The reason is that because our depth of our camera is -10, so we are able to see anything between -10 and 0. Let's put it to -10. And then we're not able to see. The reason I'm trying to show you this is because in some cases, we do put the camera to the 0 position and then point it to another vector. Let's switch this one. And then it's confusing because we don't see it where it goes. And if that happens, then then it might be because of the positioning. Okay. So Babylon vector 0. We have an error. Oh, okay, missing a parentheses. Minus. All right, I'm not going to mess this. I'm going to go back to the previous one, which was correct. And vector 3 and 0. All right. Our ball is down there, and we can't really see it. Let's put it back to 1. All right. Cool. So this is our scene now. We can, you can take a look at the JavaScript version as well, and download that one if that makes you happier. I think we are having some issues with the playground. We'll see. All right. Okay. And let's download and take a look at what we have here. Okay. So it is an HTML file with some JavaScript built into it. If we take a look at the elements, what we have is the canvas, and this is where our scene is attached. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as debugging any other of the HTML scenes, because it's mostly JavaScript, but you can always put breakpoints. And well, as I mentioned, the cool thing about Babylon.js is that now you can create mobile or headset WebXR experiences, immersive experiences. So let's take a look at some of the examples that we have here. Let's see. Okay. Here we do have the same things so far. We have a scene, we have a camera, we set a target, and we attach the controllers. And then what we have is an XR experience, async experience, and then we enable some of the features. So there are different features that, depending on the device, you might want to enable or not enable. The reason we are not seeing anything over here is because first, there's no object. And the second reason is that because this is not a XR device, it's just a browser, right, on my desktop. So this one is looking for WebXR hit test. So it's looking to see if at any point we are hitting any object with this. Well, I guess this might not be the best to show. Let's see the, well, let's give it a try. Okay, so trying out the augmented reality is also a little bit challenging. First of all, you need a device. In this case, I have a Pixel 4 that is enabled, that has AR capabilities, so AR Core or AR Kit. And also you have to enable your phone to be a developer in a developer mode. It depends on what phone that you have, so you have to Google it. But it's very interesting handshake. So every time to get it started, I have to go to the settings and about, and then tap 7 times to, and then developer mode pops out. Once I do that, I have to run my experience somewhere. Could be on your local device. And then go to Chrome Inspect Devices. So this used to be part of the Chrome DevTools. Now it's its own tab. And here you can forward your local development environment, like local host, to your device. First thing that you need to do is to enable port forwarding if you're running and your local host. If it's 7,000, you have to put the 7,000 and that one here too. So for each port, you have to do that. And once you connect it through a cable, then you can open up the localhost scenes here, or you can copy and paste any of the scenes as well. Okay. So I'm going to open it on the Chrome dev and going to click open, and it should open on my device. It's open, and once that happens, I can click on inspect to see what is running on my phone. So this little key thing on the right side is the way that we go into WebXR experiences. You have to always ask for users' permission before you go into a VR or AR mode. I can click on my phone or click here, either way. It should work. And then it's asking me to allow the camera usage because augmented reality requires camera. And I'm trying to find a plane. It usually works on planes so much better. Oh, you're not able to see. Oh my. Oh, this is going to be hard, but I'll try it again. Let's see. I don't know if you're able to see. It's very small for me to see, but there is a little donut shape in there, which we are not able to see it over here. Normally, you do see what's on your phone as well. So anytime we hit a surface, then we create that thing and to say you can put any 3D object to this location. Yeah, it's unfortunate that I wasn't able to show it to you, but I have some screencasts on my GitHub as well that you can take a look. I think this is one of the YouTube videos with the details of how to make that work. All right. So this is a really cool way of getting started with TypeScript and playing with it on the web and not have to worry about it. But if you would prefer to use it, well, build something with it in your own project, I have a few projects on my GitHub that you can take a look with the videos that explains what it is. And I'm actually using a starter from one of the Babylon.js contributors, and he has a really cool Babylon.js Webpack ES6 starter, so you don't have to start from scratch. And other than that, I do have lots of resources for you if you are interested in mixed reality. Again, on my GitHub. It's called Mixed Reality Resources, and it shows you where you can find assets, how you can create things, and all of the cool examples of mixed reality as well. If you go to the frequently asked questions, for example, you can take a look at lots of different mixed reality experiences that you can start building from. And yep, I would like to answer some questions if you have now.
Thank you, Ejgul. It was amazing. And the playground looks really nice. And your whole demo, it was really cool. We have a bunch of questions for you. So let me start with the first one. What are the use cases for Babylon? Is it only a modeling and rendering engine? Or can you make games with it as well?
It is a game engine, so you can actually create games, full-blown games, and there are lots of examples on the website too. You can start from them, and also mixed reality experiences as the ones mentioned. So some of the cool like augmented reality applications is, I think from IKEA has one. Where you can actually put a model of like 3D model of a furniture and then take a look in your own house, which is really cool. But yeah, you can create the games. And they do even have some resources for you in terms of 3D models or 3D animated models of the characters too, which is nice.
Okay, thank you very much. Lily, you are muted.
Thank you so much. I have a question from myself. I'm just curious, how does this compare to something like Three.js? What makes it different?
It is actually the same. And people do ask me that question all the time. And honestly, I don't know what is different. So there are some of the things would be probably there is node-based programming thing for textures and things like that. And Three.js might not have that. But in terms of the basic capabilities, they are doing the same thing. And it depends on which one you feel more comfortable with, I guess.
I think we also have a question, which is, how and when did you find out about Babylon? What got you hooked?
Oh, I actually found out really late. I heard it, like I start with Three.js. That's what I start building with. I think TypeScript was the thing that made me hook, because I was working with Angular a lot, and Angular is TypeScript, and at the time it was hard for Three.js modules to be imported and things. It was hard to get it to work with TypeScript project at the time. But thankfully, right now, Three.js is also written in TypeScript, and Babylon.js is written in TypeScript. So they're both great options. Yeah. And
thank you.
I think Babylon.js is a really great community. I mean, not that Three.js doesn't. They have a lot of examples and such too. But I am able to go and ask them questions, and they have this. They are trying to not close all of the issues in a day or so. Like most in a week, they would fix your problem if you have a problem going forward.
Okay, actually, we had a similar question about the community. What's the community like around this project? We partially answered this question.
It is an open source project, but it is actually supported by Microsoft. But let's say Microsoft decides to do something with all of its open source. Still, Babylon is separate and its own individual thing. And the good part about it is that it belongs to the people, right? Not a company. But at the same time, being in a company, they do have the resources, and they have a lot of applications internally using Babylon.js. One of the fun one is PowerPoint. So now you can put 3D animated things on PowerPoint, and you don't have to write any code at all, which is fun.
Thank you. We've been curious and snooping around a little bit on GitHub. What is the upcoming V5 release about?
I'm not sure actually, because V4, it's been 3 months, I guess, and they do have a new version every 6 months. One thing I'm usually focused on is WebXR capabilities. And they just come out with lots of new ones with the 4.0, but there's a lot more. And since WebXR device APIs are very new, they're changing all the time. So I'm sure they will have some fixes on that part, that things that changed. So that's also a good thing about using Three.js or Babylon.js, right? When these kind of changes happens, when things are new, they do fix it for you. They change things when the APIs change, and you don't have to worry about it. You can use your code, write your code the same way, which is nice. Yeah, one thing that was new was hand interactions for devices like Oculus or HoloLens. You can use your hand to interact with objects, and that was really cool. Hopefully, there will be more new features.
Cool, thank you. So the next question is, does Babylon take care of a different browser capabilities and different connection bandwidths, rendering on a lower resolution when needed, and in general, how does this work?
I don't think they do deal with lower resolution when it's in a different device, but as a developer, you have the chance to do that. For different browsers, they do, but at the same time, for example, again, WebXR is new, and there's a polyfill that if you are interested, that you can add, and they specifically leave it out of the general because they don't want to make your bundle bigger. So you have the choice of including that polyfill library, and that will cover most of the browsers. One thing that is problematic is iOS devices, because WebXR in general doesn't work, but the canvas, regular 2D or 3D canvas things work pretty well.
Great. I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. You mentioned mixed reality. I'm wondering if you have any cool projects that you are really into that you want to share with us.
Sure. Well, I'm actually part of the WebXR device API W3C group. I'm one of the chairs, so that it's very exciting for us, and we're about to release the candidate recommendation very soon. We are working on that, and it's really exciting. Other than that, I don't work as much as I used to, but I work with HoloLens. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's an augmented reality glass that allows you to interact with your environment, plus see additional informations, like I might be walking around and see some object and then see a tutorial about how to use it, which is really cool. So I worked on a little tool that kind of teaches you how to create mixed reality experiences and talks about how you think through designing it. And you can find the link on my GitHub first page. There are these funny GIFs. The one on the right, that says hand tracking, that's the link to the application. If you have a HoloLens, you can give it a try.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm co-hosting WebXR meetups, and we have been doing a series of project development with A-Frame. So A-Frame is another library on top of Three.js, and it's declarative. So it's basically you have different HTML tags, and you can put them together and create an experience, which is really, really cool.
Awesome. And it's really amazing. You have so many resources on Babylon. So that's really awesome. Can't wait to check out your GitHub. Do we have any other questions? Lily, do you want to add something or ask something?
I think we might have finished all the questions.
Yes, and if you wanted to see the link to the meetup, I think I have a link to from my GitHub page, YONET, but also you can search for SF meetup. Okay, I do have a bit.ly link too. WebXR meetup, bit.ly/WebXR meetup. Right here. And you can watch the previous sessions on WebXR YouTube.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks a lot again for your presentation and for sharing with us all the resources and all the information about Babylon. I think right now we are moving to our last talk for today by our lovely host, Lily. Lily will tell us about TypeScript at SNCC. So over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much. Okay. So hi again. My name's Lily. I guess I'll tell you a little bit more about what we actually do at SNCC, so I can give you an introduction as to why we're using TypeScript and how we're using it as well. So SNCC is an open source security platform. It helps you scan your vulnerabilities, find vulnerabilities in your code base. So we mostly focus on open source packages and their vulnerabilities. So for example, if I have a repo here, which is npm project with policy, I might want to know that the dependencies that I'm using are in fact in the vulnerable range, and I might want to open a pull request and bump the version. So one of the earliest things that we did is actually a CLI. And that was written at the very, very early stages of the company. So as we were a very, very small startup when I joined, the CLI was one of the main things that was up and running and used a lot. And this was written at the time in just pure JavaScript. It was, a mixture of styles, a mixture of people. It was a mixture of contractors at the time as well. You know how startups can be. But as we started experiencing hypergrowth, there were lots of features that we wanted to add, and the community was asking for them. And it became, over time, increasingly more and more obvious that it became hard for us to be able to differentiate what is, the new code that is being used all the time versus what is some dead code that feature perhaps is no longer being used. And it also became really difficult to sort of untangle what's happening where. And we really wanted to refactor this. So as we started growing, we wanted to try and refactor and make it easy to contribute to for everybody else that we were hiring. So we've turned to TypeScript as one of the tools to help us. But I don't know if anybody here has tried to do a conversion. I'd love to hear your stories if you do. And I'd also love to hear maybe what's stopping you from converting to TypeScript, because that would be interesting to talk about as well. So we decided to try TypeScript, but we didn't want to do a full-on conversion and just kind of, head down and spend all of our time just trying to convert everything and get it perfect. We needed to make sure that we could do it something small, quickly, and try to get as much benefit as we can. So let me see if I can find the original pull request where we've added TypeScript. So this would have been a few years ago now. There we go.
Hi, Lily. We are still seeing the SNCC admin panel.
Oh, really?
You wanted to show? Yeah.
Okay, let me check. I'm sharing a tab. Let me share the whole thing. Okay. So this is the SNCC CLI, SNCC. It's open source, so feel free to browse around with me as I'm talking through some things. So this is our original pull request where we've added TypeScript in 2018. So it might look like a lot of files, but I'll try and run you through some of the smaller changes that happened. So we took the opportunity to bump our node version to node 8 from 4. So that was definitely a relief. The most important thing that we want to look at is us adding a tsconfig. We kind of just took whatever was at the time recommended in the documentation. It just went with that. We made sure to target the right version of ES that would work for us and our customers. And we just added some basic TS-lint rules. So most of the changes were in the package JSON. We needed to add a build step. And as part of that, that also meant that maybe some code needed to move to a directory to make it easy to go from source to a dist folder. So if your code isn't structured like that already, you may have a little bit of a change to make there. So there wasn't a lot of changing going on. So we updated this to have an extra build step so that we could compile everything. And the rest of the changes are actually just taking the opportunity to convert very simple things like var to const and add imports. And that's what the other 37 files are. So we did the absolute minimum, and we've made the rules as lenient as possible so that anything else that was still JavaScript, we said allow JS. And a lot of the rules were just kind of shushed away for now. And that's because there was immediate benefits anyway, even with all of that kind of muted for now, to start seeing the different sort of types errors that are coming through. So there was no actual rewriting of code, as you can see. We didn't even rename the files in most cases. So in some places where it was easy to do so, we did change it to a .ts. And that's it. So after this, we were actually ready to go. And it took a little bit of organizing. We agreed internally that essentially we would just gradually keep adding more and more value. So whenever possible, at the next time you're opening a pull request, you would again bump things from var to const. You would maybe change the imports. So those things are quite simple to do. And where possible, you would rename the file to a .ts. Then after that, we took the approach of, okay, so now that we have TypeScript in place, are there small bits of the library that we could convert to TypeScript? So for example, if I was working on a feature and it had something to do with the config, I would first commit to converting this file to TypeScript. So I would spend a little bit of time to rewrite it, to make it nice for anybody else in the future to contribute to. But as you can see, majority of the changes, again, were just updating kind of syntax to something more modern. And where possible, sometimes we added very, very basic types, just for the core areas that were also clear and easy to do so. So we didn't spend a lot of time trying to be perfect. We just wanted to start doing something. And today, this repository is still our sort of progress repository. There are some areas, unfortunately, that we didn't get a chance to fully convert, but those areas are so few and so small. So if you look in source lib, you'll see some of the top level things would have been attempted already to be migrated, but for some reason it would have prevented us from doing so. Maybe it was going to be a breaking change because of how the imports were done, or maybe it was to do with like a hot loading. So this repo really had every possible scenario you could think of, every possible type, every possible flavor of JavaScript. So some of the areas were much harder to untangle than others. And I also wanted to show a little bit of what it looks like now that we have some types in place, that we were able to start creating new things with a completely different approach. So for anything that was new, we were able to completely take advantage of types, and sort of our go-to would always be to create functions and type the inputs and outputs to them, especially if it's a library that gets consumed by everything else. And that's because if you type the core bits, TypeScript will kind of do the hard work for you. And in other places where these functions are being used, you are going to get a lot of type inference. So you don't have to type absolutely everything. You can just do the important bits to you and the ones that don't otherwise get inferred. So let's see if we have anything more interesting here. No, not particularly, but I'll show you maybe an older file so you can see the comparison. Like this code is quite far away from what the older code used to be. So if we just check anything in here, I wonder if we still have something with promise chains. So yeah, so you'll see there was, back in the day, quite a lot of promise chains going on. There would be a lot of things that were just kind of flowing, but updating as they go along, and therefore mutating. And it became really difficult to understand in the end, what were you actually working with at the end of this function? Did it have all of these properties? Did it have only some? Did you delete some along the way? So TypeScript really, really helped us to try and understand what is actually happening to the data along the way. And then that gave us safety to say, okay, now that I have some types and I understand what's happening, I can start to try and untangle some of these promise chains. Luckily there's only a few. Some files would have had 7 or 8 or even more. So it's really easy to get lost, and it's really difficult to contribute, especially as we were growing a lot and we had new people joining all the time. Trying to sort of onboard onto this repository and provide value was proving difficult. So we really needed to do something different and try and make it easy for us. So that was quite a while ago. But nowadays, we would start absolutely everything with TypeScript. So we even have a template to help us get started. So we're using a chaos template because, as some people mentioned, kind of setting up the repository for the first time and adding TypeScript, even though it's really easy to go and read the documentation, it still is, a little bit of that extra effort. Have I done all of the steps right? Have I chosen the right configuration? So we've tried to make it as easy as possible with a click of a few buttons, to start a new repository. So this would be the template. So you, by default, get the package JSON, a tsconfig, you get all of the bits and pieces that you want. It's opinionated in terms of what you're going to use to format your code as well, so you don't even have to think about it. And I'll also even set up a couple of basic things for you, like this is what a test looks like, this is a tsconfig for a test. And this is also a nice way to try and push forward some preferred ways of working. So we wanted to migrate away from Tap because it didn't support TypeScript to Jest. And one way to do that was to create a template where only Jest would be available, so that going forward, we would only use that. So with this template, every repo that is in my team, which is tech services, gets created. And it makes it really easy for us to get started with a brand new template in one day and have something that is releasable, has a pipeline, and we can also publish to NPM really quickly. And over time, over the years, as we've experimented with using TypeScript, different people started to kind of get different ways of working with it. Just like we were talking about earlier, you have different preferences. Maybe you start by typing stuff first. Maybe you would, only add a few types. But personally, for me, I even kind of try and do pseudocode with types. It's really easy to read, and that makes it really powerful to try and decide on an interface between an API and an application, for example. By defining the set of types, you end up in a place where everybody can go away and work on different areas because the boundaries are so clear of what everybody needs to achieve. So for example, I'll show you here. So this repository is called Snyk API import. And what it does is it wraps the Snyk API and it helps users to use it as a CLI and kind of does some of the work for you. So what you might have to write for yourself, which is I want to import my repositories into Snyk. You might do this through the UI, but it's not ideal if you have, hundreds and thousands of repositories. You would like to automate this away. So instead of learning how to use the API and then, understanding how to poll for changes and knowing when the import is complete, you might just use this tool and sort of let it run with some configuration. So in order to build this, I first had to implement the API. And this is where I would start. And this is how I work today as well. Anytime I work with anything external, let's see if we can find a good one. I would start with basically typing what am I expecting to send to the API, and then typing what am I expecting to receive back from the API. So for example, here, I would create a function that is called what the integration API does. We could quickly look at that. See if I would like to list integrations, and an integration is something that knows to speak to GitHub or GitLab or somewhere else where your projects might be. So if I want to list those, I will need to call this get endpoint, and you'll see that the response, this is the response where I'll receive the type of integration and its public ID. And do we have anything for the body? No, there's only a parameter, which is the org ID. So then we can start with saying that this is what I'm expecting to receive. I'm going to get an interface where something is going to be a string and the ID is also going to be a string. So once I've done that, that means that the minute that I start using this function anywhere, I automatically get auto-completion. I automatically know exactly what I'm going to get back. And that means that I'm less likely to make mistakes, for example, accessing a parameter that's not there. And that's really, really powerful. Let's see if we have a more complicated one. That is even less. Okay, that's more like it. Okay, so here, this is the import endpoint itself. So in order for me to import my repository, I'm going to call import. And what I'm going to get back is I'm going to get back something called location URL in the header. So what do I actually need to pass to it? So the body is here. So we get a target, files, and exclusion globs. And you'll see that I started before I even did anything. I would have created this signature first so that I understand that this will always need to return this. And I understand that I have to have this thing called the target, this thing called files, this thing called exclusion globs. And then I would need to be able to have a look at what they look like. Let's see where they're defined. There you go. So this is something called a target, and you'll see again that all I'm doing at this point is I'm basically going to go here where I'm going to see the API. I'm going to see what it expects from me. So I see that it says that I need a target that is an object with these properties. And I also need to send an array of files, and this is what a file looks like. So instead of guessing or forgetting or doing anything with this data, I would first create this type. Because then I am very, very certain that this is what I need to send. And when I create my function, I suddenly have a very clear boundary that I'm working with. It becomes really easy to sort of send the right thing and not make that mistake. And I also find that it makes me work much, much faster when integrating with APIs. Otherwise, there could be quite a lot of back and forth while you're testing, figuring out, have you sent the right shape? Are you getting back all the data that you expected? This takes all of that guesswork out of the way, and that's absolutely amazing. So yeah, I think this is what I really wanted to share, that TypeScript can be incredibly powerful when integrating with third-party APIs or even an upstream microservice, whatever it is that you have, because typing the boundary gets you most of the way to basically integrating with this tool. And that is incredible.
So thank you, Lily, a lot for this presentation. It's like super exciting for me to hear about the migration process. at like big projects, big JavaScript projects, because I was like going through the same thing at Hasura 1 year ago, like almost 1 year ago. And yeah, it's always like exciting to hear how other companies and other projects are doing it. And I have quite a few questions for you. So let me start with the first one about unit tests. Did you have unit tests for the plain JavaScript? And if not, they are being added now?
Yes, so there were always tests, but as you know, JavaScript is incredibly flexible and forgiving. You could send all sorts of things to the test and they would still be like, yep, this is okay. So it was also a little bit difficult to trust those tests, because sometimes you could see that the parameters were in the wrong order, or somebody's just made a simple mistake. That doesn't happen with TypeScript. So as part of the migration, we committed to also migrating the tests. There's no point having TypeScript in your code, but then the tests being very lenient. So we wanted to also make sure that the tests were just as strict, and it also forces you to mock things that are realistic shape, so that you're not missing some important bits that you would never get in real life. Like if you have an object with some properties that are mandatory and it was impossible to have a partial version of it, in the test you also shouldn't have a partial version, because then you're not testing on real data.
And would you say that it's now easier to test the code base, to write those tests with TypeScript?
Absolutely. Again, auto-completion is amazing. You suddenly get like, this is what you should send to me. And you go, okay, I'm just going to create a fixture that is exactly that shape, because otherwise it's not going to compile. So it may sound like a little bit more work, but in the end, having tests that catch things before you've even pushed the code is, a lot more powerful than having to find this random bug later.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You've been showing this template, this TypeScript template, and we have a question. Is it private or is it public?
It is a public template. I think everything in that in my group is basically public. So we mostly build open source tools for our customers. So we want them to be able to see the code, because as a security company, you also want to say, hey, this is what we do with the things that you're giving us. But also it means that they can add some extra use cases that maybe we wouldn't support, like a package that's no longer supported or a framework that is no longer even alive.
Okay, got you. And could you tell us a bit about like what's the balance between new code versus maintenance or cleanup at Snyk?
New code versus maintenance. It's an ongoing battle always, especially as you're growing. But what we really try and do, and what is personally really important to me, is that every time you're adding a new feature or you're fixing a bug, if there's something in the area that you're working in that's not right, that's outdated, tidy it up first, make it nicer than when you found it. So that way you're constantly pushing forward. And this is how we've progressed with our migration, and we're able to complete the migration for our main application, which is private, to 100% TypeScript, even though it was absolutely huge. But it just means by making it part of your process, not only are you constantly improving your code base, but also you're teaching yourself like good house cleaning tips. It's like, once you've had dinner, you're going to wash up your plates. Why not do that in your code base?
Yeah, I totally get it. We've been doing the same at Hasura. Like, whenever there is a new pull request, we try to convert every file that we touch, and sometimes something else, depending like whether we have more time or not. So
exactly, right? It's the time. Yeah. So like, are you really pressed for time? Maybe you have to cut a corner a little bit and say, I'm not going to convert as much as I wanted to. And if you have a bit more time, you're going to say, I've done all of this. Please, please review.
Yes, exactly. So I have a few questions myself for you. So Snyk is an open source project, and was community helping out with the migration?
Not with the migration, no. So as it's a CLI for being able to communicate with the platform directly, most of the open source contributions are from customers that have a unique setup or have a setup that is not yet supported, but they really want to see it working because maybe they use it on a different project. So we've had some amazing, meaningful contributions from people that are experts in Java, for example, because they would see something and say, this doesn't quite work for my project, but by the way, here's how it could work. And so we would work with them to try and get those changes in.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And how was it with learning TypeScript? So did you, when you made this decision to go with TypeScript, did the team already know TypeScript? Were you familiar, all of you in the team with TypeScript, or did you need to learn it?
That's a really good question. And thinking about it now, it seems insane. But no, we didn't know TypeScript, right? But what we did know is that it was just JavaScript. So we knew that even though we didn't know TypeScript, we didn't have to in order for things to keep working. We could keep writing JavaScript while we learned TypeScript. So that's what we did. We made sure that everybody knew that there was space and time for that learning and encourage people to say, hey, you could convert this file to TypeScript in less than 5 minutes. Let me pair with you. I'll show you how to do this if you're not familiar. So it wasn't, we just knew that we needed something like TypeScript to help us with the problems that we were seeing, small bugs, things not like the parameters being in the wrong shape and nothing catching it. Like those kind of things, once you've experienced them, you look for something to try and get rid of it. And TypeScript promised to help.
Yeah, I get it. Cool, thank you. So my last question, I promise this is my last question. Did you also consider other languages, or was it only TypeScript? We're going with TypeScript. Did you consider Reason or Elm or PureScript or all of the or Flow maybe?
We did consider Flow, but we went with TypeScript, and I don't remember why. We did have a couple of days where it was a spike as a proof of concept, and TypeScript just worked for us at that time. So we basically decided that because of the spike that we could do the migration in less than a couple of days, and therefore that was powerful for us, and we just went with it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I see that we don't have any other questions. So maybe you would like to add something, Lily?
So yeah, thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you so much for having me today. This was really, really great, especially having the ability to talk about TypeScript especially with people that are working on exciting things. It's quite rare, so this was really interesting.
I'm really also very excited to be a host for today's meetup. And I think we are going to wrap up today's event. It was super exciting to be here. It was my first time participating in this Contributing Today meetup, and I had Lily as my co-host. It's very amazing. So thank you everyone for joining. Please let us know how you liked the event, or maybe you want to tell us a bit about your journey with TypeScript or your relationship with TypeScript. Do you love it? Do you hate it?
Yes, let's keep talking. So a couple of things left is that the recording will be available on the website after this, and we'll announce the last book winners in the chat. And yeah, if you have more things to share in the chat, please do. I'll be checking that, and we can engage a little bit more about friendly debate about TypeScript.
Yes, and don't forget about next week's event about machine learning. You can check out the information on the website as well. Okay,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.